Let's get into some climate change news. I'm just showing you this headline. I'm not actually going into the news story because it's New York Times. They have a paywall, and I just whatever. I don't want to deal with it. But the headline is interesting enough right here. After hurricanes batter Louisiana, residents dread rebuilding again. Of course they do. Why wouldn't they? But my question is, if you understand climate change, if people were appraised of the how bad climate change has already progressed, if they already knew where we were at in the timeline of climate change, why would you even think about rebuilding there? Why wouldn't you go like, well, it's going to get worse next year, and then the year after that, and then the year after that, and then the year after that, and then it's going to get really bad in about 5 years? Why would you even consider? Why would you even think like, oh, well, I think I'm going to rebuild? Why would you even think that's a good idea? Why do people think that's a good idea? Because misinformation around climate change is so deep and so wide that people think that it's still a debate, or that the climate is always changing, etc., etc., etc. Let's see. Memes. I've showed this meme before. Let's see. Here we go. Oh, no. Didn't work. Dang it. Hey. Maybe it won't let me put this meme in while I'm... Oh. Whoops. I don't know. Maybe it won't let me do... Oh, here we go. If you see this graph, if people were shown this graph on a daily basis, right? I mean, a lot of us have seen this graph or understand what this graph is saying. But if people were shown this graph on CNN every single day, they'd be like, holy moly, holy crikeys. Whoa, whoa. Wait, so this is the last 800,000 years? Whoa, what's going, like, why would people even consider rebuilding in Louisiana? Why would people even consider buying property in Miami? Or some places in San Diego, or some places in California, or some places in New York? Why would you even consider? Why aren't people running away from these places with their pants on fire? Right? Yes, insurance companies have seen this graph. They understand this graph fully. And they understand that people don't see this graph every day. Or that when you show people this graph, they're like, oh, that's fake. Somebody made that up. Etc. 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 Basil Peterson, environmental melancholia. There's that. And then there's that. Diana, my meme means melancholia, yes. Memeancholia? Huh? Anybody? Judy Truitt, my brother in Seattle owns a small insurance company. He has told me for years. Climate change is in the models, right? And it's in their models to ignore climate change for as long as they can, right? So, I mean, as long as you're selling the insurance, as far as the payout, right? You can sell people insurance all day, understanding those memes or understanding what's going on. But are you going to pay out? It's a question. uh, creative experiments. You don't understand the bottomless pit that is human denial. When Soviets invaded Berlin, Germans were still going to the opera and coffee houses. Well, yeah, for sure. People really want to have that normalcy bias going on, right? They really want normality. They really want things to just remain fine. Everything's fine. Everything's fine. Everything's fine. Uh, let's move on. We've covered this one before. Global climate goals virtually impossible without carbon capture, says the IEA. I swear to God, I've read this article at least 3 times in the last year. The same exact article. But this, apparently is all new information from Reuters, and this is from yesterday. A sharp rise in the deployment of carbon capture, utilization, and storage technologies, or CCUS, or CUS, or CSUS. I would like to call it SUS. We'll just call this CCUS SUS. Technology is needed globally if countries are to meet net zero emissions targets designed to slow climate change, the International Energy Agency said on Thursday. They said this on Thursday. Just last Thursday. A growing number of countries and companies are targeting net zero carbon dioxide emissions by around the middle of the century, right? That seems to be now the predominant. We've got to get to net zero by 2050. We really got to do this, guys. By around the middle of the century, in the wake of the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement, to reach that, the amount of CO2 captured must rocket to 800 million tons in 2030, from around 40 million tons today. How much emissions will be released getting to the 800 million tons? That's what I want to know. At what point does it become a snake eating itself? We got to develop all these technologies, and that takes emissions. And we got to build out all these CO2 capture devices, and that takes emissions. So we're going to capture the emissions that we released building all these capture devices, and then we're going to capture some more. See how that works? Up to $160 billion needs to be invested in the technology by 2030. A tenfold increase. Well, maybe we can take that $10 billion, the whole $10 billion from Jeff Bezos that he pledged. Maybe he can pledge it to this. We need 150 billion more. But that still, 150 billion is still like a sixth of the military budget of the United States. So, pennies. I'm talking pennies on the dollar. A tenfold increase from the previous decade, it added. I mean, they're talking about 160 total, not like 160 billion a year out of the $770 billion a year that we spend on the military. Pennies. Without it, our energy and climate goals will become virtually impossible to reach. IEA head Fatih Birol said in a statement, while the story of SUS has largely been one of unmet expectations, it's largely been one of unmet expectations due to lack of commercial incentives. Well, the free market just doesn't see any future in this. Large capital costs and public opposition to storage, especially onshore, it was having significant momentum this year, the IEA said. There's been more than 30 new projects announced recently, with governments and industries committing almost $4 billion. Only this year, Birol told a webinar. I mean, $4 billion is still a lot of money, but you know what I'm saying. Oil-rich Norway alone has pledged to spend 16.8 billion crowns to build 2 carbon capture plants. That's $1.76 billion. To build 2 carbon capture plants and an open access offshore storage, a project dubbed Longship after the vessels used by Vikings. Isn't that scenic? Isn't that imaginative? Doesn't that just conjure up the images of long ago? Well, capture and storage in the Viking era generally meant looting. Exactly. Exactly. We are trying to bring home what you don't want to keep, the CO2, Norway's Prime Minister Erna Solberg told the web. That's hilarious. Burrell's, the IEA hoped SUS would become commercially viable this decade, as building more facilities around the world would help to drive down the costs. All right. Well, what are the odds, guys? What are the odds that's going to actually be doing what it should be doing? I don't know. I mean, it seems like not so much money, right, to build 2 carbon storage capture units. Not even $2 billion. Look how cheap that is. Jeff Bezos pledged $10 billion. So, that builds what? I'm going to do math. It's going to be difficult. That builds 10 carbon storage capture units? No. Yeah. 10 or more? Come on, guy. Let's get on it. Caleb Rochester, we need giant ice cubes from space. Well, that's where ice cubes come from. They come from space. Valhalla 5.6, it is a very large planet to suck all that CO2 out of. Yeah, Lasso and ice comet. Yes, that's right. Ice is all over space. It's everywhere. It's abundant. All we need to do is figure out how to capture all that ice from space, and we'll bring it back down, and we'll put it in the Arctic. Okay? Everybody, are you on board? Okay, all we need is $5 billion. Something. George Sacroclides, turn the carbon into diamonds and it will pay for itself. Yes, bang on. That's a great idea. Yes, G. Demarest, Kevin, some space ice for his computer. I do need some space ice in my life. Lowy Appitz says they are planning the construction of a new nuclear power plant in the Netherlands. It generates the equivalent of 32 million solar panels. Wow. Nuclear. Alexei Kaparinin, there are ice moons. Indeed. We just need to lasso a moon or a comet or something. D-Truth, a friend wanted to buy some land, but the owner has the rights to mine the coal for 100 years. Oh, my God. Yeah, mining rights. That's totally different from owning the land, right? Oh, I own this land. No, somebody else owns the mining rights. So sorry. Or the drilling rights. Or the oil exploration rights, or whatever. I drink your milkshake. I drink it up. I drink it up. Remember that? Anybody know that's from? I drink your milkshake. I drink it up. One of my favorite movies and favorite lines. Anyways, moving on. Quickly, I didn't mean to do it in this order, but we're going to dip into some coronavirus. Just a quick skim of what's going on. Record new cases in Poland and the Netherlands. Infection surge in Iran. Marseille fury at Paris decree to shut its bars. So I guess there's a bit of a second wave in Europe. So let's just look at Dutch cases hit new record daily high. Iranians urged to wear masks following record rise in daily coronavirus cases. Poland reports a record daily rise after easing restrictions. European stocks to 3-month low amid second wave fears. Indonesia reports record daily rise in cases as deaths top 10,000. Russia reports highest daily rise in cases since July 12th. And in good news, fewer than 10,000 new COVID-19 cases in a day in UK, says Health Secretary. I guess that's good news. I don't know. Uh, COVID cases in Spain exceed 700,000. So, yeah, they're reinstituting a lot of lockdowns. They're re-upping on the lockdowns. And somewhere where did they deploy? They have dogs that are able to pretty much accurately sniff COVID positivity. That's pretty wild. Why do you need to take a test when you have one of these dogs? 4 COVID-19 sniffer dogs have begun to work at Helsinki Airport in a state-funded pilot scheme that Finnish researchers hope will provide a cheap, fast, and effective alternative method of testing people for the virus, John Henley reports. A dog is capable of detecting the presence of the coronavirus within 10 seconds, and the entire process takes less than a minute to complete, according to Anna Helm Bjorkman of the University of Helsinki, who was overseeing the trial. It is very promising, said Helm Bjorkman. If it works, it could prove a good screening method in other places. So there you go. You just need one of these COVID dogs. Yeah, I mean, way cheaper than a test. I'm all for it. You know what I'm saying? Do you guys have one of those dogs? I don't really want to go take this coronavirus test. Y'all have one of these dogs that just sniff the coronavirus on you? Roof. Basil Peterson, do they attack? Osama dogs greater than humans, yes. COVID sniffing dogs are BS, says Alexi. I have my doubts as well, but I don't know. It's pretty cool though if the dogs can detect the coronavirus. They you get it real quick, right? You get a yes or a no real quick, don't you? Anyways, let's move on. Gas companies are abandoning their wells, leaving them to leak methane forever. Just one orphaned site in California could have emitted more than 30 tons of methane. 30 tons of methane. There are millions more like it. Millions. This is from September 17th. From Bloomberg Green. The story of gas well. Oh, I'm going to have to do this in another window. I wasn't really planning on reading this too far into this, but let's see if we can see what we can see. Oh, they're not going to let me do this. The story of gas well number 095-20708 begins on November 10th, 1984, when a drill bit broke the Earth's surface 4 miles north of Rio Vista, California. This was its spud date. Darn it, they're just not going to let me read this. Sorry, guys, I don't have a subscription to Bloomberg, and I thought I was going to be able to read this thing. Well, there you go. The headline pretty much says it all. There are wells out there leaking methane forever, so that's all you need to know. Good times, right? Right? Oop. Caleb Rochester, does the dog stick things up your nose? Rich Diana, corporations leaving cleanup for the losers and suckers always. All right, let's move on. My apologies for the non-reading of that article, but it was going to be good and depressing. Let's move on to this from The Guardian, September 23rd, which is yesterday. They're suffering now, quote unquote, Americans scramble to adapt to daily reality of climate crisis. Heat and wildfire smoke force residents to seek respite and buy cooling systems and air purifiers if they can afford them. Wildfire smoke had painted the sky orange last week when Sam, a Bay Area resident, plugged in his newest purchase, an air filter with a car adapter that would turn his minivan into an escape vehicle. Sam's daughter has an immune disorder, and with smoke from nearby fires making the air among the globe's dirtiest, the family fled north for clearer skies. Sam, who asked the Guardian to withhold his last name to respect his daughter's privacy, said the attempts to protect her vulnerable lungs cost several $1,000s. Just the fact that we have this option available to us makes us incredibly lucky, he said. The family was not alone in spending significant amounts of money to mitigate the impacts of the wildfires that have raged across California this season. People across the U.S. West, including hundreds of miles away from the blazes, reported buying air purifiers for the first time to cope with the smoke that cast a hazy glow over multiple states. The most effective air purifiers can run $200 to $500, and many sold out. Others said they had to run up their air conditioning bills or paid for gas and hotels to leave the area. When most people think of adaptation to the climate crisis, they think of governments building up infrastructure to protect property against rising seas, or the agriculture industry finding new ways of growing crops with different rain patterns. But individuals, I'm sorry. Yeah, the agriculture industry is on the case. They make it sound like they are, but they're not. The individuals are already adapting, whether they are buying air purifiers, installing air conditioning to fight the heat, or spending big to evacuate ahead of intensifying hurricanes. Americans around the country, if they have resources, are dedicating more of their income to living the extreme weather fueled by climate change. The most vulnerable are left behind in the absence of government aid. In the western U.S., the climate crisis has doubled the area burned by wildfire from 1984 to 2015, according to research cited in the federal government's climate assessment. The area burned from 1916 to 2003 was more closely related to climate factors than forest management, the report said. Cities across California have opened cleaner air centers where people who can't afford purifiers or don't have homes can escape the smoke for a few hours, but they have been less frequented than in previous years because of concerns about COVID-19. Public spaces such as libraries have been closed, eliminating another respite. Health officials advised residents with the means to filter the air in at least one room to create a place to get relief. Some also advertised a cheaper solution, attaching a furnace filter to a box fan, which I'm a fan of. No pun intended. But filters quickly flew off the shelves. When the filters fly, something about the lung capacity dies or something like that. It really is an adaptation to this new normal, said Alberto Ayala, executive director of the Sacramento Metropolitan Air Quality Management District. The idea of air purifiers as adaptation to climate change is ahead of the policy conversation that needs to be had, Ayala said. Are all these options equally effective? No, they're not. What are we going to do with those that cannot afford it? Well, we should think about that. In the short term, wildfire smoke can worsen chronic lung and heart conditions. It can trigger asthma attacks, heart attacks, and strokes. It can also weaken the body's ability to fight off illnesses like the coronavirus. The longer-term health effects of continuous smoke exposure are unknown but expected to be significant. Researchers have linked even short-term exposures to air pollution from factories, power plants, and car exhaust to an increase in premature deaths among the elderly. The last time we got hit, it seemed to be an episode where there was a handful of days that were really, really bad, but we got some clearing out, Ayala said. This time that hasn't been the case. It's been bad for a long time. Many parts of the West have had hazardous levels of air pollution for weeks. At Stanford University, south of San Francisco, low-income graduate students said they were struggling to respond to the triple threat of the pandemic, heat, and dirty air. Because of COVID-19, many student researchers are working from home. Some don't have air conditioning or ventilation because California has historically been temperate. They also can't open the windows because the air is choked with smoke. That would be my house at one time. It's a little smoky right now, not too bad, but I can smell the smoke. Kat Gonzalez, a PhD student who lives off campus, purchased an air purifier for $219, asked the university to cover the expense through an emergency fund, but her request was denied. I'm not rich by any means on my PhD stipend. But I figured my roommate and I would go in on this upfront cost because we just don't know how long the fire season will be, Gonzalez said. At night, they shut the curtains to trap the cool air in. During the day, they work in front of a small fan that Gonzalez moves from her bedroom to the living room. Eventually, it just gets so hot in here that you can't focus anymore once it hits 3 p.m., 4 p.m. It was getting upper 90s inside, Gonzalez said. It's truly an environmental justice issue happening at Stanford right underneath Stanford's nose, because who's going to be most hard hit by more toxic air? It's going to be black and brown communities. It's also going to be the poor grad students who can't afford to buy a $200 or even a $50 air purifier. A Stanford spokesperson said air purifiers were available upon request to students in university-provided housing. Climate effects broadly are more likely to hurt people of color. Both globally and within the U.S., a huge body of research shows that air pollution hurts the poor and people of color the most. Because of systemic racism, those vulnerable populations are more likely to live near polluting factories and highways and have chronic health conditions, and they are less likely to have adequate health care. They are also less likely to have the financial means to purchase tools to help limit the dire effects of climate change, from wildfire smoke and heat to sea level rise and flooding. I also would like to see the issue of stopping the things that hurt people's health, the damage to not just the environment, to also to people's health. How do we stop all those things, right? We're talking about people living close to highways or refineries or factories, right? And they have to breathe in dirty air. Obviously, having some social justice equity would be, everybody being able to afford to get away from those things. But also, I think, at the root, those things not existing in the first place, right? Why does anybody have to live with those things or close to those things? Why those things are affecting somebody? Even if those without the means could have the means to, brace themselves or distance themselves from the damage of climate change. The damage of climate change is still going on. So somebody or something is being affected all the time. So, you know what I'm saying? The root of the problem. Let's get to the root of the problem. Anyways, people are adapting everywhere, and everybody's seeing the effects of a climate changing, said Christy Eby, a climate researcher and professor at the University of Washington Center for Health and Global Environment. Eby said adapting to current climate change and trying to stem the crisis were equally important. By the way, nobody is going to be spared. Of course, climate change is going to affect Black, brown, and poor communities adversely, right? However, eventually it will touch everyone and everything and everywhere. Make no mistake. It's just that, who has the resources to move away, get away, adapt, or whatever is the question. The CO2 we have in the atmosphere right now will drive climate change for several more decades. So we have to mitigate to reduce the kinds of impacts we're going to see in several decades. But in the short term, people are dying and suffering now. Well, adaptation is necessary, but it's also expensive and unavailable to many. Well, that is just going to be the future of the planet, right? So you ain't going to save everybody from climate change. I'm sorry to tell you. That's just not happening. I'm sorry if that's rough news or if that's not very empathetic or if I'm sorry. That's just the truth. Like, a whole lot of people are going to die because of climate change. That's that. Because we didn't do the things we needed to do. Because we aren't taking any of the steps right now. We're not doing the things right now. We're not making any bold moves. We're not, overthrowing the entire system that we live under right now in order to adapt or in order to mitigate climate change. We're not doing any of those things. So the reality that people should not be should not be sheltered from. Let's not shelter people from the reality that a whole lot of people are going to die because of climate change. Straight up. And because the system we live in is not being reconfigured, or retooled, or reimagined as a system in which everybody can take part in the solution. Everybody can have access to, life, liberty, and happiness, and all that kind of good stuff. Climate disruption. So here we go. Climate disruption is now locked in. The next moves will be crucial. This is from September 22nd in the New York Times. America is now under siege by climate change in ways that scientists have warned about for years. But there is a second part to their admonition. Decades of growing crisis are already locked into the global ecosystem and cannot be reversed. This means the kinds of cascading disasters occurring today, drought in the West fueling historic wildfires that send smoke all the way up to the East Coast, or parades of tropical storms lining up across the Atlantic to march destructively toward North America, are no longer features of some dystopian future. They are the here and now, worsening for the next generation and perhaps longer, depending on humanity's willingness to take action. I've been labeled an alarmist, said Peter Kalmus. I read a lot of Peter Kalmus tweets on this channel. A climate scientist in Los Angeles, where he and millions of others have inhaled dangerously high levels of smoke for weeks. And I think it's a lot harder for people to say that I'm being an alarmist now. Last month, before the skies over San Francisco turned a surreal orange, Death Valley reached 130 degrees Fahrenheit, the highest temperature ever measured on the planet. Dozens of people have perished from the heat in Phoenix, which in July suffered its hottest month on record, only to surpass that milestone in August. Conversations about climate change have broken into everyday life, to the top of the headlines and to center stage in the presidential campaign. The questions are profound and urgent. Can this be reversed? What can be done to minimize the looming dangers for the decades ahead? Will the destruction of recent weeks become a moment of reckoning or just a blip in the news cycle? The Times spoke with 24 climate experts, including scientists, economists. Why you don't need to talk to economists. Those bastards. Sociologists and policymakers. And their answers were by turns alarming, cynical, and hopeful. It's as if we've been smoking a pack of cigarettes a day for decades, and the world is now feeling the effects, said Catherine Hayhoe, a climate scientist at Texas Tech University. But she said, we're not dead yet, quote unquote. Their most sobering message was that the world still hasn't seen the worst of it. Gone is the climate of yesteryear, and there's no going back. The effects of climate change evident today are the results of choices that countries made decades ago to keep pumping heat-trapping greenhouse gases into the atmosphere at ever-increasing rates, despite warnings from scientists about the price to be paid. That price, more vicious heat waves, longer wildfire seasons, rising sea levels, is now irretrievably baked in. Nations, including the United States, have dithered so long in cutting emissions that progressively more global warming is assured for decades to come, even if efforts to shift away from fossil fuels were accelerated tomorrow. Twice as bad, quote unquote, what we're seeing today this year is just a small harbinger of what we are likely to get, said Jonathan Overpeck, a climate scientist at the University of Michigan. Things are on track to get twice as bad as they are now, he said, if not worse. And he might be using the date like 2050 or 2060, but nay, sir, I say unto thee, Earth has already warmed roughly 1 degree Celsius or 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit since the 19th century. The most optimistic proposals made by world governments to zero out emissions envision holding warming to below, hold that warming to below 2 degrees Celsius. Nations remain far from achieving these goals. Usually, each passing year's records are framed by the past, the hottest temperatures ever observed, the biggest wildfires in decades. However, as Christian Proistescu An assistant professor at the University of Illinois noted on Twitter, it may be time to flip that chronological framing and consider today the new starting point today. Don't think of it as the warmest month of August in California in the last century, he wrote. Think of it as one of the coolest months of August in California in the next century. Ooh. Here's some pictures. Smoke from the Bobcat fire in Los Angeles. That's near me. Fire retardant stained a property in Juniper Hills, California this month. Smoke shrouded the San Francisco city center in early September. Climate change is more a slope than a cliff, experts agreed. We're still far from any sort of game over moment where it's too late to act. Well, or far. Are we far? How far are we? Experts. How far are we? There remains much that can be done to limit the damage to come, to brace against the coming megafires and superstorms, and save lives and hold on to a thriving civilization. We can certainly move in a direction that serves us a lot better, said Stephen Pine, an environmental historian and professor emeritus at Arizona State University. It's not that it's out of our control. The whole thing is in our control. It's just that we are not in our control. That's the problem there, Stephen Pine. It won't be easy, particularly if past is prologue. Managing climate change, experts said, will require rethinking virtually every aspect of daily life. And about that, I can say ding, ding, ding. How and where homes are built, or even why they're built. How about questioning why? Does this home need to be built? Does this home need to be 15 rooms? Could this home just be 2 or 3 rooms and a bathroom or 2? How power grids are designed. Do the power grids even need to be designed or built? That's the question. How people plan for the future with the collective good in mind. It will require an epochal shift in politics in a country that has, on the whole, ignored climate change. One hope raised by some experts is that the current onslaught of fires and storms, the death, the destruction, the apocalyptic skies might motivate people to unite behind calls for action. Those orange skies, that was scary, said Chris May, a climate scientist and coastal engineer in San Francisco, referring to the midday tangerine glow over Northern California this month, a consequence of smoke from wildfires. Yet she wondered if they would have been even more powerful had they struck places like Washington, D.C. Perhaps there, she said, they'd bring about more change. When lightning strikes, the issue of climate change might have been back of mind for most Americans when a dramatic rain-free lightning storm swept across Northern California in August in a region that gets little rain in summer or early fall. The most destructive fires, like those that swept through the wine country in 2017 and the town of Paradise 2018, have come in October and November. But one August night's spectacular lightning show became the next day's emerging disaster as hundreds of fires were sparked, mostly in hard-to-reach terrain. I thought it was Antifa that set all those fires. 3 of those blazes now rank among the 4 biggest California fires since record-keeping began in 1932. I'm joking about the Antifa, by the way. You got to disclaim everything these days because nobody has any sense of humor or sarcasm. And everything is taken literally. And the traditional fire season is just beginning. Fires, along with others in places including Colorado, Oregon, and Washington, destroyed entire towns and sent smoke tens of thousands of feet high. San Francisco, Portland, and Seattle have suffered some of the unhealthiest air quality on the planet, beating cities such as Beijing and New Delhi for the title. Smoke spread all the way across the continent, with particles coloring sunsets on the East Coast. There was no place to escape. Evidence of global warming, which scientists said helps drive a rise in wildfire activity by creating hotter and drier conditions, was hanging visibly in the air. For a long time, there was so much focus on how climate change would affect the most vulnerable, like low-lying island nations or coral reefs, things that don't dramatically affect the economic powerhouses of the world, said Catherine Mock, an associate professor at the University of Miami's Rosenstiel School of Marine and Atmospheric Science. There's often been this arrogant assumption that wealth provides protection. Just ask the people in Malibu. Recent events, she said, are a vivid reminder that we're all in this together. That notion raises a counterintuitive bit of hope. The more people who are affected, particularly the affluent and influential, the more seriously the issue gets addressed. I don't know. You might want to find that, file that under knee slapper. But anyways, first, experts broadly agree if we want to stop the planet from relentlessly heating up forever, humanity will quickly need to eliminate its emissions of planet-warming greenhouse gases. That means cleaning up every coal plant in China, every steel mill in Europe, every car and truck in the United States. Clean up, by clean up, do you mean go green? Or do you mean clean up by shut it down? That's, if you're actually talking about reality, we're talking about shut it down. Shut down the coal plants, shut down the steel mill, shut down the cars and the trucks and the planes, by the way. It's a staggering task. Actually, it's not. You just shut it down. It's not that hard. Just like everybody stayed home in coronavirus. You just stop doing it. It's not that hard. It's not a staggering task. You just stop doing it. You stop doing it. It's just that simple. I just gave you the solution. Boom. Do it. It means reorienting a global economy that depends on fossil fuels. No, not reorienting. Stopping a global economy. Just stop it. Stop the global economy. So far, the world has made only halting progress. But they haven't halted anything at all. You like that one? You like that one? I'm here all week, kids. A tree smoldered in Happy Camp, California this week as fires extinguish hot spots in the area. A fire whirl near Susanville, California in July. And this is a crack in the Amory ice shelf in Antarctica last year. If warming destabilizes the continent's ice irreversibly, ocean levels could continue to rise for centuries. Experts also made a point they say is often underappreciated. Even if we start radically slashing emissions today, it could be decades before those changes start to appreciably slow the rate at which Earth is warming. In the meantime, we'll have to deal with effects that continue to worsen. In terms of being reversible, I can only think of things in sci-fi films. Superman trying to spin the Earth in the other direction so Lois Lane doesn't die. Said Juan de Clay Barreto, a social scientist at the Union of Concerned Scientists. Seriously, it is not reversible. Truth bomb, bro. Juan. Truth bomb, Juan. Oh, hold on a second. Anyways, you guys okay? We're going to go back to this. If I can find it, we'll go back to it. Again and again, climate scientists have shown that our choices now range from merely awful to incomprehensibly horrible. If we cut emissions rapidly, about 1/7 of the world's population will suffer severe heat waves every few years. So, remember earlier when I was saying a lot of people are not going to escape the effects of climate change. Period. You know, whether we're outraged or appalled or not, it's just going to happen. Failure to do so doubles or triples that number. If we act now, sea levels could rise another 1 to 2 feet this century. Yeah, that's another one to file in the knee slapper bin. If we don't, Antarctica's ice sheets could destabilize irreversibly, and ocean levels could keep rising at an inexorable pace for centuries, making coastal civilizations all but unmanageable. The best hope is to slow the pace of warming enough to maintain some control for humanity. In our research, we found that most systems can cope with a 1.5 degree or 2 degree world, although it will be very costly and extremely difficult to adapt, said Dr. Hayhoe of Texas Tech University. But in a 4 degree world, in many cases, the system just doesn't work anymore. Done. Kaput. Fin. So even as nations cut emissions, they will need to accelerate efforts to adapt to the climate change they can no longer avoid. We need to figure out how to put ourselves less in harm's way, said Gernot Wagner, a climate economist. Climate economist? What? Oxymoron? Jumbo shrimp? What? At New York University, humans are remarkably resilient. Civilizations thrive in climates as different as Saudi Arabia and Alaska. They're amazing, aren't they, humans? When disaster strikes, we've demonstrated an ability to unite and respond. In 1970 and 1991, two major tropical cyclones hit Bangladesh, killing 500,000 people. The country then built an extensive network of early warning systems and shelters and strengthened building codes. When another major cyclone struck in 2019, just 5 people died. The human capacity for adaptation is extraordinary. Not unlimited, but extraordinary, said Greg Gerard, professor of environmental humanities at the University of British Columbia. He added, I'm much more concerned for the future of non-human than I am for the future of humans. Thank you, Greg Gerard, precisely because we're just very, very good at adaptation. Right. When that major cyclone struck and only 5 people died, how many animals died? How many plants died? How many crops were destroyed? How far does our adaptation go? I mean, that's good. That's good that only 5 people died. As the case in Bangladesh illustrates, adaptation is usually a reactive measure, not a preventive one. Adapting to climate change means envisioning bigger disasters to come, again, flipping the framing away from history and into the future. How about doing things totally differently instead of just bracing for impact by, taking these kind of like reactionary steps? If you can't see it, is it real? Humans have difficulty imagining things that we haven't experienced yet, said Alice Hill, a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. There's a great organization for you. They really care about people. Who oversaw resilience planning on the National Security Council during the Obama administration. After every major catastrophe, whether it's Pearl Harbor or 9/11, people always look back and say it was a failure of imagination. That also applies to climate change, she said. It's hard to visualize the entire West Coast aflame until you actually see it. If we can't see it, we tend to discount the risk. There are concrete steps that can be taken today. Consider wildfires after a deadly spate of wild western blazes in 1910. The United States government scaled up its firefighting force, committing to extinguish wildfires wherever they occurred. For decades, that worked, giving Americans confidence that they could move into forested areas and remain safe. But that policy led to a buildup of dense vegetation in the nation's forests, which then, when combined with a warmer and drier climate, means that those forests are increasingly primed to burn bigger and hotter, overwhelming the nation's firefighting capacity. Going forward, experts said the country will have to shift its mentality and learn to live with fire. States and communities will need to impose tougher regulations on homes built in fire-prone areas. Federal agencies will have to focus on managing. Again, this is just a lot of like knob twisting. If we twist the knobs a little bit, everything will be fine. Federal agencies will have to focus on managing forests better, selectively thinning some areas, and even preventively setting controlled fires, and others to burn off excess vegetation that can fuel runaway blazes. There's a lot we can do, said Jennifer Balch, a wildfire expert at the University of Colorado. At Boulder, we've just been stuck in an emergency response rather than thinking and looking ahead. Golly gee. Whether Americans can adopt that mentality remains an open question. We've often heard the argument that it will be too expensive to cut emissions and it will just be easier to adapt, said Noah Diffenbaugh, a climate scientist at Stanford University. But we've now had decades of warnings. He said we're not even adapted to the present climate. Cascading disasters, adaptation can quickly become bogged down in a tangle of competing motivations and unintended consequences. Proposals for stricter building codes or higher insurance premiums face opposition from builders and voters alike. And there's the moral hazard problem, which is when people are shielded from the cost of their decisions and thus make bad ones. For instance, local communities reap increased property taxes from allowing buildings to rise in disaster-prone areas, but they don't pick up most of the tab for disaster recovery. The federal government does. Another challenge to adaptation is that as climate change intensifies, it increases the risk of compound hazards when numerous disasters strike simultaneously, as well as the risk that one disaster cascades into another. In late 2017, large wildfires scorched Santa Barbara, California, burning away vegetation that stabilized hillside soils. Heavy rainfall followed a month later. The result, devastating mud flows that killed 23 and injured 163. That's a cascade. In Houston, in 2017, Hurricane Harvey shut down gasoline refineries, strained hospitals, and spread toxic substances and pathogens as floodwaters swamped the city. And when the Camp Fire destroyed Paradise, California in 2018, nearly 20,000 displaced people arrived in nearby Chico, which suddenly found its sewage system pushed to the limits. More pictures of devastation. It's really challenging to predict exactly where and how all of these cascading risks will unfold, said Amir Agakuchak, a climate scientist at the University of California, Irvine, who studies compound hazards. Experts also noted that climate change is an accelerant of inequality. Those most affected globally and in the United States tend to be the most vulnerable populations. Many are also among the people at highest risk for COVID-19. As thousands have fled fires in recent weeks, farm workers have continued to pick ripe crops, sometimes in evacuation zones. They already live in a state of crisis that has been magnified, compounded by the pandemic, said Dr. DeClay Barreto of the Union of Concerned Scientists. One concern is that adaptability will not be a collective effort. Wealthier people may find ways to protect themselves while others are left fending for themselves. Even after American disasters, for example, relief is often off limits to undocumented residents, experts said. Here in South Florida, people are building these amazing homes that float on the water. They can withstand Category 4 hurricanes, but they cost $6 million. There you go. So Dr. Mock of the University of Miami. So how do we manage these risks so that it's not just people with resources who stay safe? A lifetime of clues. For well over a century, science has provided us with powerful clues that this was coming. You don't say. Tell me more. As early as the 1850s, researchers realized that greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide could trap heat on Earth. This came at the dawn of the industrial age, which brought fossil fuel burning. They just went ahead and did it anyways. Right? They were like, hey guys, this might be a problem. They were like, no, don't worry about it. We're going to do it. We're going to do it. We're going to drink your milkshake. Fossil fuel burning factories that ultimately not only filled people's lives with modern conveniences, but also filled the sky with carbon dioxide. Wow. Now warming the world. By the 1990s, scientists had a deep understanding of the future risks of a warming world. By the 2010s, researchers could show how extreme heat waves, droughts, and floods now unfolding were influenced by climate change. Technology offered solutions as well, whether solar power or electric cars, yet governments have been slow to rein in reliance on fossil fuels. They're going to remain slow. I feel like the climate scientists have kind of done our job, said Dr. Kalmus, the Los Angeles-based scientist. We've laid it out pretty clearly, but nobody's doing anything. So now it's kind of up to the social scientists and also the climate communicators, such as myself and others who are talking about this and letting people know, hey, guys, hey, this is what's going on. Hello. Anybody going to pay attention? No? Nobody? There are children out there trying to wake the adults up. Hello? Your entire mentality, your entire paradigm is a sham. It is but a thin veil draped over reality, the reality which is going to be very ugly in the future. Will the recent spate of disasters be enough to shock voters and politicians into action? We have a lot of evidence that doesn't happen, said Dr. Gerard of the University of British Columbia. Again, well said, Dr. Gerard. One 2017 study found that people who experience extreme weather are more likely to support climate adaptation measures than before, but the effect diminished over time. It may be that people mentally adjusted to unusual weather patterns, updating their perception of what they considered normal. All of it can feel overwhelming, particularly for people wanting to make a difference. Susan Cutter, who directs the Hazards and Vulnerability Research Institute at the University of South Carolina, noted that the climate change's biggest problem may be that the sense that it is beyond our control. The planet is burning, so does it really matter if I turn off the light? There's a lot of people that think that also is how to proceed. What's the difference? Enjoy yourself. Whatever. Do your best and all that. There's too much complexity and, frankly, too much that needs to be changed, and we're flitting from one concern to another, she said. Even so, some important steps are being taken. Cities like Montecito, California, and Austin, Texas have pursued difficult measures to protect against future wildfires. Britain, the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution, now goes coal-free for months at a time, having rapidly shifted to cleaner forms of electricity. And if optimism springs from knowledge, the good news is that scientific research lays out what to do. It's not a mystery, nor is it beyond the bounds of human ability. What's beautiful about the human species is that we have the free will to decide our own fate, said Ilona Otto, a climate scientist at the Wegener Center for Climate and Global Change. We have the agency to take courageous decisions and do what's needed, she said, if we choose. All right. You guys feel hopeful? You guys feel like we can turn this around? How do you feel? Come on. Give me a yay. Give me a what? Maybe. Give me a maybe. Give me a no siree. Hey guys, remember to like, share, and subscribe, and you can support the channel at the links below, PayPal, Patreon, Square. Also, if you'd like to watch the live streams, you can watch the live streams on my Patreon channel. You can subscribe for as little as $1. So hopefully I will see you over there, and thanks so much.